Hello, Sao Paulo. It is an honor to be here with you today. I am going to talk about the disruption of the world's single largest industry. Energy is a $6 trillion a year industry, and it is being disrupted right now. Now, so you understand who I am and where I come from. I didn't come from energy. I came from software. I spent 13 years at Microsoft where I worked with Bill Gates and where I developed an intuition around the exponential changes happening in computing and tech and how that's happening in sector after sector. And now, among other things, I'm an investor in clean energy startups. I'm on the board of an organization called E8, and we invest in all sorts of startups working to advance the future of clean energy. And I'll talk more about that at the end. But energy is more than just a financial issue. It's a moral issue. We are in the 21st century, yet more than 1 billion people don't have electricity. They don't live in the 21st century. The dark areas on this satellite map of the Earth are areas where whole civilizations have no access to modern energy, and that holds societies down. And at the same time, the way that we utilize energy has all sorts of problems. The World Health Organization estimates that air pollution kills more than 5 million people a year on planet Earth. That is more than 10 times the total annual death toll from all murders and all warfare combined. In Brazil alone, air pollution kills 49,000 people last year, almost as many people as were killed by homicide in Brazil. And there's this other systemic issue that you heard about yesterday, which is the carbon that we're releasing is heating up the planet. 9 of the 10 warmest years on planet Earth have been in the last decade. 2016 was the warmest year on planet Earth. 2017 almost met that, and it will go up again. The good news is that energy is being disrupted, and I don't use that word lightly. Here's what it means. This is Peabody Coal. Peabody Coal was the largest private sector coal company in the entire world. Peabody Coal is now bankrupt, or just came back out of bankruptcy. In a 3-year period, they went from billions of dollars in revenue to having to file for bankruptcy protection. And it wasn't just one company. We had 8 of the largest coal companies on planet Earth go bankrupt. The global index of coal company publicly traded stocks dropped 90%. Now it's up a little bit, so now it's only 75% down, but not a very good place to be. This didn't happen because we stopped using coal. Coal is still the #1 source of energy on planet Earth. But after 150 years of coal consumption rising and rising since the Industrial Revolution, for the first time in 2013, it stopped rising. Coal consumption, coal demand has peaked and is now going down. And what's driving that globally now is the shift to clean energy. Now, wind is one of those pieces of clean energy, and to show you what's happening, I'm going to have to come to economics, because in general, people will buy the cheapest energy they can buy. Now, today, if you want to build a new coal power plant or natural gas power plant, it will cost you around 6 cents a kilowatt hour, about 21 centavos a kilowatt hour. In 1980, not that long ago, wind power cost 10 times that. Wind in the US interior cost 57 cents a kilowatt hour, 10 times as much as coal or gas. But in the intervening years, the price of wind power in the US interior here has dropped by a factor of 15, a 94% drop in price. And that's happened not just in the US, it's happened all around the world. The red areas on this map and the yellow areas are the areas of intense wind. And in those windy areas, wind is becoming increasingly the cheapest energy you can buy. And Brazil has some world-class winds, especially in the eastern part of the country. In fact, by some measures, Brazil has the most reliable and steady winds of any country on land. And so we see wind development happening, especially in the east of the country, where there's now more than 12 gigawatts of wind power deployed. And while wind power prices are dropping everywhere around the world, Brazil shocked the world just 2 weeks ago. The results of a power auction were announced. And in Brazil, the price of wind power without subsidies came in at 7 centavos, 2 cents a kilowatt hour, 1/3 the price of coal or gas power. This almost tied, very, very close to catching the cheapest wind power ever seen in Mexico, within 1/10 of a cent or so. And so we see in country after country, wind power prices are in free fall. And as they're dropping through that red dashed line, that's the line of coal and gas prices. And that latest Brazil price is there. So this is a revolutionary change. Now, on the basis of pure economics, it makes more sense to build wind turbines in most places than to build coal or gas power plants. Now, driven by policy and that plunge in price, the scale of wind power around the world has exploded. It's gone up by a factor of almost 7 in the last 10 years. And that itself drives the price down. Because something we see in all exponential technologies is that driving up the scale drives more learning, more innovation, and drives down the price. So every doubling of the scale of wind power has driven down the price by about 20%, and also driven up the reliability. That means there's a virtuous cycle with every exponential technology, in fact, but especially with wind power. At first, your new exponential technology is extremely expensive, too expensive for most markets. But once you get your first customer, your prices fall. And when your price is lower, you find that there's another new market you can tap into that you couldn't before. And when you tap into that new market, you have more demand. Your scale goes up. And when your scale goes up, your price comes down again. So we see this virtuous cycle happening again, everything from AI to biotechnology to carbon fiber, and especially in energy. So wind power prices will keep declining. That's not a final price. The price of wind power should drop again by half over the next 10 to 15 years. We could have 1 cent, 4 centavo a kilowatt hour wind power prices here in Brazil. But solar power makes wind power look slow and stagnant. The explosion of solar is like nothing we've ever seen. Again, economics is what drives this. In 1977, 1 watt of solar panel cost $77. Today, it costs 30 cents. That's a 250 times price decline. It's faster than anything we've ever seen in physical infrastructure. Bridges don't get cheaper like this. Building roads doesn't get cheaper like this. Building dams or buildings doesn't get cheaper like this. It's almost like a digital transformation in the most fundamental physical infrastructure. And so now we're hitting the crossover point with solar as well. We're in the sunny parts of the world. It's just the cheapest electricity you can buy, period. Again, a coal or gas plant will cost you 6 US cents or 21 centavos a kilowatt hour. Let's look at some solar prices around the world. In the southwest of the US, Tucson, Arizona, 4.5 cent solar, 1/4 cheaper than coal or gas. The price of 20-year solar contracts in the US has dropped by a factor of 8 over the last 10 years. In India, the country where coal companies most hoped coal demand would go up, we had 2 record low bids last year. They say coal is 3.1 rupees, solar is now 2.4 rupees, 3.8 cents, a third cheaper than coal in India. And so you see the price of solar in India has dropped by a factor of 4 in just 4 years. Here in Brazil, in that power auction completed just 2 weeks ago, solar came in at 3.4 cents, 12 centavos a kilowatt hour. And while that's still a bit more expensive than wind is here, the sun produces electricity during the day when demand is the highest, so it fits into that demand. This is not the cheapest solar in the world, though. There are cheaper places. Mexico, 2.5 cents. Abu Dhabi, one of my favorite photos of all time, these oil sheikhs in front of their new solar panels in Abu Dhabi, 2.4 cents. This was the cheapest electricity contract ever signed when this happened about 16, 17 months ago. But now the cheapest solar in the world, and this happened about 6 weeks ago, is in Chile, 2.15 cents a kilowatt hour. And so again, you see solar has been dropping in price even faster than wind prices. And in every country around the world, it's plunging, plunging, plunging in price. And driven by that, solar has exploded. I told you wind power went up by a factor of 7 in the last decade. Solar has grown by a factor of 50 in the last decade. To put that in another perspective, here it is on an exponential scale. Every tick is a factor of 10 increase. It took more than 20 years to get to the point where 1% of the world's electricity happened from solar. It took 2 years to get to 2%, and that's where we are today. And in another 2 years, it'll be 4%. And again, we hit that virtuous cycle where as solar grows, the price comes down and down and down. And this has major implications. In the equatorial band, with the areas of red and orange, solar is now competitive and, in fact, the cheapest energy without any subsidies whatsoever. And those billion people that don't have electricity, where do they live? Almost all of them live in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia or a few in Latin America, all in the sunniest parts of the world. And Brazil, indeed, is one of the sunniest parts of the world and is poised to be a solar superpower. And I'll come back to that. And the price of solar will keep dropping, and it's dropping faster than wind power. So while solar today is more expensive than wind in Brazil, within 3, 4, 5 years, that will no longer be the case. Now, I do have to talk about some specific issues here, because Brazil has a massive investment in hydropower, and that has worked out extremely well for Brazil, but it has some consequences. We talked about this a bit yesterday. These dams scattered throughout the river system of the Amazon have some negative issues. They lead to flooding of areas of high biodiversity in the Amazon. But there's another issue, there's another reason that I think that the era of building big dams in Brazil is ending now, and that is simple economics. Because building a new dam in Brazil costs you 3 times as much as building a new wind farm, or twice as much as building a new solar installation. So for that reason alone, I think Brazil will utilize the hydro that it has quite well, but will probably be building more wind and solar for the foreseeable future. Now, if we talk about solar and wind, people ask, what happens when the sun goes down to your solar output? What happens if the wind stops blowing to your wind power? And the best thing you can do is to put these together, because wind and solar are counter-cyclical. They're complementary. Here's a perfect day in California, 24 hours. At noon, the sun is shining the most, producing the most energy, and statistically, the wind blows more at night. Here's 11 months in Germany. You get the most solar power in the summer months and the most wind power in the winter months. And so now we see combined projects that integrate these two. In Chile, just 2 months ago, we had a bid of 2.5 US cents, less than half the price of coal or gas, for combined wind and solar that would produce over a 24-hour period. Now, with wind and solar together and a large-scale grid, you can get to maybe 70 or 80% of your electricity. But to get to the rest, we have to crack this problem, energy storage. And this is now the most exciting area in clean energy, in my view. You all know who this man is? Tony Stark? He's the closest thing we have, I think. Elon here is introducing the Tesla Powerwall battery, and in the first week after announcement, they took $1 billion in orders for this product. And the funny thing is, this is not a Tesla technology, not really. This is actually a Panasonic technology, a whole bunch of Panasonic cells integrated into a Tesla case, if you will. So Elon is a brilliant marketer, among other things. But I say this to illustrate that it wasn't one sudden scientific breakthrough that led to products like this. It's that lithium-ion batteries are also an exponential technology that have been getting cheaper by scale. They've dropped in price by a factor of 25 over the last 25 years or so. And in fact, they've surprised forecasters again and again. Here's a set of forecasts for the price of batteries made in 2013. And I'll show you that the US Department of Energy forecast that lithium-ion batteries would drop by a factor of 1/3 over the next 30 years. They said that's going to be very impressive, big price drop. What actually happened is that lithium-ion batteries dropped by 80%, a factor of 5, just since 2010. That's what's happening, and the forecasters are left in the dust. Bet on the innovators and not the forecasters. And batteries are still quite expensive. In fact, they still cost many times more than solar or wind do, but they're now cheap enough that they can be used for certain applications. In Australia, the South Australia state, integrated large amounts of solar and wind and had reliability issues with their grid as a result. So Elon Musk said that in 100 days, Tesla could solve those problems. And in fact, in 100 days, Tesla built the world's biggest battery bank in South Australia, a 100-megawatt bank. And this works like a digital product because we had a coal power plant flip a breaker and go offline a couple months ago in South Australia. And normally that would have caused a blackout, and it would have taken minutes or hours to bring up a new coal or gas plant to take its place. Instead, in 140 milliseconds, the battery was taking over. That's what digital technology looks like in energy. And so now we see increasingly almost every solar and wind project happening, in the US at least, is happening with integrated batteries. In fact, in the US, we had an auction earlier this year, February, where a solar company bid for evening power, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., and it beat natural gas plants for hours after the sun had gone down because of the integration of batteries. And now even solar and wind plus batteries are coming in cheaper than coal or gas in some parts of the world. And the prices of batteries will keep on dropping. In fact, they drop at almost the exact same rate as solar. Here's the price of solar coming down as a function of scale, and here's what happens to the price of lithium-ion batteries as a function of scale. So battery prices will keep dropping. By 2030, the price of lithium-ion batteries will drop by another factor of 3 to 5, and that will make it truly competitive for large amounts of energy storage. Now, I keep saying this thing that would have sounded crazy a few years ago. I'm talking about cheaper energy. We've always known that we should go clean and move away from fossil fuels, but we thought that deploying clean energy would be much more expensive. But if you take these trends seriously, it looks like in every part of the world, some combination of solar, wind, and storage will be the cheapest energy there is. And now even very conservative organizations are starting to see this. Let me show you one. Here's a very conservative organization. This is the IEA, the International Energy Agency. This agency is the world's expert on energy. But the IEA is not what I would call an exponential organization. I will show you. Let's look at their forecasts for what will happen with solar. We have to read these from the bottom. Here's a series of forecasts they made. The light blue line at the bottom is their forecast from 2002. They said we'll have 50 gigawatts of solar deployed by 2030. Well, now we have 400 gigawatts deployed by the end of 2017. In 2004, they said, oh, okay, that forecast is a little bit low. We've had to lift our forecast. In 2006, they said, we're a little bit low. We'll lift our forecast. 2008, we'll lift our forecast. 2009, we'll lift our forecast every single year. It's like someone at the IEA is looking at their Excel spreadsheet and hitting copy, paste each year, right? And they still don't get it. They are still making linear forecasts for growth, the top red line, when what's happening is exponential, is that every year we deploy about 40% more solar than the year before. Yet even this organization that has been wrong about every single forecast it has ever made about solar in the entire history of its existence says solar will be the #1 source of electricity on planet Earth, and that solar prices will be unbeatable. I prefer a graph from this organization. AllianceBernstein is a private equity firm in New York City. They're financiers. They're not environmentalists. But they put out this chart 3 years ago now in a memo to their clients. They called it Welcome to the Terror Dome, because they were telling clients, be afraid. This chart has on the bottom the price in the US of coal, gas, and oil. And then what's that on the upper right, that gray line? Did someone's child take a crayon and scroll on their parents' report? That's the price of solar coming down. And if we layer in the price of wind and the price of batteries, that's what's happening. This is a 70-year time frame, right? That is what is happening around the world. So this starts to look like a disruption, starts to look like a Kodak moment, if you will. That used to be a happy thing, right? Now it's not a good thing when we say a Kodak moment. Now I want to be honest with you. We build energy infrastructure to run for decades. If you build a new pipeline, a new coal power plant, it's expected to run for 30 or 40 years. This disruption is not going to happen in a few years, even as fast as these technologies are happening. This will take decades, but it is happening now. In January of last year, China canceled 104 planned coal power plants. By the end of the year, it was over 160. The plants in red, 40 of them, had already started construction, at least $10 billion spent and just written off. In 1 month last year, India canceled 14 gigawatts of coal power plant, $8.9 billion US just canceled. And the answer, the reason they gave was clear as day. The price of solar power is in free fall in India. How could we possibly build coal now? Even if it's cheaper now, it's not going to be cheaper in 5 or 10 years. So we know we're going to have to shut it down. And in fact, that's what's happening. I've been comparing the price of a new coal power plant or a new gas power plant to new solar. But something even more disruptive is happening, that solar and wind are getting so cheap that building a new solar plant or building a new wind power plant is getting cheaper than operating your existing coal or gas fleet. That's not just me saying that. The CEO of NextEra in the US, a large utility, it operates Florida Power and Light. I know many of you have probably visited Miami. You are drawing power from this utility. He said in January, renewables, building new, will be cheaper than just running their existing coal plants in the next handful of years. And in fact, Carbon Tracker did an analysis of that. Here's the cost of coal power plants in the US, and here's the cost of building new solar. That is a massive disruption. And for those that are investors in those existing plants, that's an incredible potential for loss. It's a very, very scary place to be. Now, because I'm from the US, I get asked quite often, what about this guy? Well, isn't he going to stop all of this happening in the US? And I can talk about it at more length, but the short answer is no. Trump is having almost no impact on the clean energy transitions happening in the US, let alone globally. In fact, in the first 8 weeks of this year, more coal plants closed in the US than during Barack Obama's entire first 4 years. That's what's happening. Trump is not a factor at this point. Okay. All of that has been about electricity, but there's this other way that we use energy. We use energy to move us and our goods and our products all around, right? And that is overwhelmingly, that is oil. And this matters because oil is the single most valuable global commodity. It can be a $2 trillion a year commodity, and it's highly volatile, and those price spikes drive global recessions. Right? And oil is highly, highly sensitive. It's about a 90 million barrel a day market, and a 2 million barrel a day oversupply can lead the price crashing to $30 a barrel. And a 2 million barrel a day shortfall, or 2 million barrels a day more demand than supply, can send the price soaring to $150 a barrel. So a 2% shift in supply-demand can cause a 400% swing in prices. I feel bad for anyone whose job it is to forecast short-term oil prices. I think it can't be done, more or less. But maybe long-term forecasts can be done, and I'll explain why. Now, if we were talking about oil 10 years ago, we'd be talking about peak oil supply. Can't get enough oil out of the ground. People want more than we can produce. The price of oil will go sky high. We'll have $200 a barrel oil. Right? None of that happened. What we talk about now is something different. We talk about peak oil demand. The moment at which the world simply demands less oil than it used to, in the same way as happened to coal, right? And I'm not the first to see this. In fact, the Saudi oil minister of the 1970s, during the OPEC crisis, Sheikh Yamani, he saw this, and he warned his fellow sheikhs earlier in this century, the Stone Age didn't end for a lack of stone, right? And the oil age will end with oil still in the ground. What's he saying? What he's saying is he's warning his fellow sheikhs the world is going to invent better technology that replaces the need for oil. Right? The Stone Age ended because we invented bronze. And you could make bronze into swords and plows. It was lighter, it was sharper, it was more flexible. And so those rocks on the ground became worthless. And so Yamani's saying this might happen to our oil as well. And now it's happening. 3 years ago, I didn't believe it. But it's clear now that electrification of transport is an exponential technology and a disruptive one. Here's why I didn't believe it. Close your eyes just 1 second and go back 10 years and imagine what you thought an electric vehicle looked like 10 years ago. Open your eyes. Did it look something like this? Could you take this on the highway? Was it safe? Could you get it up to 60 or 70 or 80 kilometers an hour? Could it even get you to work and back? I don't think so, right? But this has been changed. Most disruption comes in from the low end, but Tesla came in from the high end and totally changed the perception of what an electric vehicle was. And in fact, Elon had all along a secret plan for how Tesla would come in from the high end and disrupt the market. It was very important to him. In fact, it was so secret that he published it in 2006 in the Tesla blog. And you can go read it yourself, and I think you should, actually, because he's talking about that virtuous cycle that I mentioned. He said, look, here's Tesla's master plan. We're going to make a $250,000 electric sports car, fastest car in the world. We're only going to sell a few thousand, though. Okay, that's not very disruptive. But we're going to use that to go through that virtuous cycle. We're going to use the revenue from that to build an $80,000 luxury car, best car in the world. We're going to sell hundreds of thousands of those. We're going to use the revenue from that to build a $35,000 mass market car, if you call it that, and we're going to sell millions of those. And that's where it gets disruptive. And now Tesla, actually, as a company, it has some problems. Tesla may or may not survive. They can't produce these as fast as customers want, but it no longer matters. Even if Tesla were to go bankrupt, the electric vehicle revolution is now unstoppable. Every manufacturer is making new electric vehicle models aimed at lower price points and higher range. There's about 200 different electric vehicle models coming onto the market in the next 5 years. And so you see Nissan introduce their Leaf in December, cheaper than a Model 3, 240-kilometer range. Volkswagen said a month ago they're going to spend $25 billion just to secure batteries for electric vehicles that they want to sell in the next few years. General Motors announced that their future is, quote, all electric. Every General Motors vehicle will have an electric or hybrid option. Right? And now it's funny to even talk about electric vehicles as being disruptive because they're so very small. There's more than 1 billion cars on the road. There's only 3 million electric vehicles, 0.3%. 1 out of every 300 cars, a couple pixels on a chart looking at overall transportation. It's irrelevant today, but the rate at which they're growing is phenomenal. 58% annual growth, doubling every 15 months. Exponential. To put that another way, 20 years to sell the first 1 million electric vehicles. 18 months to sell the second million. 8 months to sell the third million. It'll be about 5 months to sell the fourth million. That's what an exponential looks like. And again, the forecasters were just totally left blindsided by this. Here's a forecast by the U.S. Department of Energy, the EIA. How many electric vehicles would there be in the U.S. with a 100-mile range is the blue line, or a 200-mile range, the red line. The red line's so low, you might not be able to see it. Let me help you out. They said by 2040, we'd have 20,000 electric vehicles in the U.S. with a 200-mile range. Tesla has pre-sold 500,000 Model 3s. One manufacturer is blowing that away. And as we sell more electric vehicles, the most expensive component is the battery. As we sell more EVs, we sell more batteries. That means the battery prices go down. As the battery prices go down, the vehicle gets cheaper. As the vehicle gets cheaper, we sell more of the vehicle, and that means the battery prices go down again. We're in that virtuous cycle. And if we look at the pace at which electric vehicles are getting cheaper, we could have, by 2030 or so, a 5-seater car like the Tesla Model 3 that accelerates like a Porsche, that has self-driving features, and which is cheaper than a 2-seater smart car. That's what the green line is. And if that sounds insane, consider this. Here's why. This is the entire engine and drivetrain of an electric vehicle. This is the equivalent parts list for a gasoline or ethanol vehicle. The only reason electric vehicles are expensive is because batteries are expensive and because they're still made in small numbers. When they're made in equivalent numbers, there's every reason to believe that this will be much cheaper than this. Now, there are still limitations, of course. The reality is that gasoline still has more than 10 times the energy per gram or per kilogram as batteries, right? That's improving. Lithium-ion batteries have tripled their energy per unit weight over the last 25 years. And in the lab, there are other technologies, solid-state batteries that could have 3 times the range, lithium-air batteries that could have 10 times the range. These batteries, when they appear, at first they'll be quite expensive, actually, and at first they won't be used in cars. They'll be used in places where weight is at a premium. I have one of these drones, a DJI Phantom 4. It flies for 30 minutes. With a lithium-air battery, it could fly for 300 minutes. And now you're talking about something more commercially and industrially useful. And so now you have, even with current batteries, companies actually thinking about air transport. There's a company in Dubai flying their prototype air taxi. And then earlier this year, in the last 2 months or so, Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, unveiled this. This is the Cora. It's a company called Kitty Hawk that he invested in that makes a flying vehicle, all electric, that takes off like a helicopter and then flies like an airplane. It can take off and land anywhere, and it has a multi-hundred-mile range, and it probably costs a very small amount per kilometer traveled. And it's actually fully autonomous. There's no pilot in that, because the last thing we want is humans actually steering these things around. So that leads to autonomy, because autonomy is the second technology that combines with electrification to disrupt transport. Autonomous vehicles are here. They're on the very verge of deployment, and they can simply do things that you and I can't do. They can see all around them with LiDAR. They can make decisions in microseconds that it takes us whole seconds to make. Now, how many of you have seen, or how many of you have gotten to ride in an electric vehicle? Raise your, in an autonomous vehicle. Raise your hands. 1 or 2, a few of you. Okay, for the rest of you, I'm going to show you a video of what it's like to be in an autonomous vehicle. And this is a very American autonomous vehicle. Here's what it's like.
Team will never believe this.
Oh my goodness. Go is the right word. Holy shit. Holy shit. There's no fucking hands on that wheel. Oh my god. What?
It's driving itself.
Ah! Ah!
Sometimes I'd say those are the screams of the oil futures market. I was in Japan in November, and I met a company I'd never heard of. They gave me a ride in their robocar, and I screamed too. We don't actually scream. They're very boring drivers most of the time. They're family vehicles is the idea. Waymo, Google subsidiary, has 500 of these on the roads. Cruise Automation, this startup, has 500 on the road too. And in fact, General Motors was so panicked about what they saw happening that they acquired this startup for $1 billion. It was only a 1-year-old startup. And now they say they're going to deploy this technology in autonomous Ubers, basically, not in 2029, but in 2019, next year. Toyota, earlier this year, decided to invest $2.8 billion in autonomy, in a self-driving car startup. Last summer, we had 3 fleets of self-driving trucks crisscross Europe. And not only did these save on labor, and not only could they drive 24 hours a day to get longer range, But by drafting after each other, they cut their fuel use by 25 or 30%. Software eating energy consumption. Tesla says the self-driving hardware is already in the current Model S in the last couple years. This is a video of a stock 2016 Tesla being driven with new software they have. When autonomous features get better and better, Tesla releases it as a software update to drivers that already have their car. This is on the very verge of being deployed. And that, in turn, accelerates this third technology, or this third trend of transport as a service, ride sharing, right? And this matters because it changes the economics. Today, you buy a vehicle, you buy a car, and it costs a lot of money up front, and you pay less attention to how much you're spending per mile. But when you get into a taxi or an Uber, you're paying by the mile, you're paying by the kilometer. And that changes the economics. One reason Uber has been so successful is that in most parts of the world, an Uber costs about half as much per mile or per kilometer as a taxi, about $1 a kilometer, we would say. Right? So that's brought the price down. If you make it autonomous, you can cut the price in half again, about 50 cents a kilometer. Make it autonomous and shared. These are shared pods and being tested in Dubai. You can cut the price, again, 25 cents a kilometer. And if you go and make it electric, you can cut the price again. Because while electric vehicles are more expensive up front than gasoline vehicles today, they cost less over their lifetime. They cost less because the energy cost going into an electric vehicle is 1/4 of what it is in an internal combustion vehicle per mile or per kilometer. They're 90% efficient as opposed to maybe 15% efficient in an internal combustion vehicle. And so when you look at the total cost of ownership, here's a study looking at this in London. Here's the petrol vehicle in the middle, the total cost over 4 years. And here's the electric vehicle. Even today, electric vehicles are already cheaper, and they'll just get cheaper and cheaper than that. Within 5 years, per mile or per kilometer, an electric vehicle could cost half as much as an internal combustion vehicle. So if you call an Uber or get into a taxi, are you going to pay one price, or are you going to pay twice as much for the noisy, polluting, stinky gasoline vehicle? I know what you're going to do. You're going to take the cheaper option, right? So those three trends of electrification, autonomy, and ride-sharing or transport as a service all accelerate one another. And so now this revolution is nearly unstoppable, and cities and countries realize that. The mayor of Beijing announced last year all 70,000 taxis in Beijing would go electric. The energy minister of India tried to one-up that by saying by 2030 in India, only electric vehicles would be allowed to be bought new. The ministers of France and the UK have said the same by 2040. What's happening right now is happening most in the largest car market in the world, because in China, electric vehicle mandates are already in place. And in China, the new vehicle mix will have to be about 20% electric by 2025. But that's the pace at which electric vehicles are growing anyway. That's the pace at which they're growing in the market. Now, I told you that a 2 million barrel a day swing in oil can send the price skyrocketing to $150 a barrel or crashing to $30 a barrel. How long until electric vehicles are destroying 2 million barrels a day of oil demand? On current pace, 5 or 6 years. And then I believe we can forecast the long-term price of oil, and it will be cheap because, like coal, consumption will have peaked and gone down. And in fact, we see forecasts from every organization around the world for electric vehicle growth just keep rising. That's the change in just the last 2 years of forecast. So when will oil demand peak? We can't say for sure, but here's some estimates. The IEA says it will never peak. We'll keep using more oil forever, every year. But you know what I think of the IEA and their track record already. Bloomberg says, actually, we think it could peak as soon as 2020. Now, I think that's crazy. That's too soon. What do big oil companies say? Oil majors in Europe. Here's Total in France, multi-billion-dollar company. By 2030, oil demand will peak. Statoil changed their name to Equinor. They say by the 2020s, oil demand will peak. Shell, I was on the phone with Shell this morning. In the next 5 to 15 years, oil will hit peak demand and go down. So what does that do if your entire business model is based on selling oil for your entire country? Or if 70% of your nation's revenue comes from oil and gas? What does that do in Brazil? Not as much, perhaps, but Brazil has maybe 6–7% of its exports are oil. Another chunk of its exports are cars and buses and trucks. What happens to those sectors? I know we have a number of people from Petrobras now. What I would ask you is, are you an oil company or are you an energy company? Because those trajectories may be different. What will it do to the ethanol market in Brazil? Because if demand for gasoline has peaked, demand for ethanol will peak and go down as well. Okay, so finally, how do you take action in a sector like this that is being disrupted? The Chinese character for crisis is both danger and opportunity, and I think we have both of those right here. We talked a bit yesterday about climate change, and I want to be clear, as fast as this transition is happening with clean energy, it's not at all clear that it's happening fast enough. We have to decarbonize at a faster pace than we ever have in history. And to do that, to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius limit that the Paris Accords have and that scientists have told us is safe, we can only use about 1/4 of the coal, gas, and oil reserves that we know of. What happens to the other 3/4? They're worth an estimated $22 trillion around the world. Does that value go to zero? Is that a bubble being popped? And if it is, will that have consequences for the rest of the global economy? I think it will. In fact, Citi says this estimate is too low. Citi says the total value of fossil fuels that we can't use is more like 100 trillion US dollars. That is an enormous, nearly incomprehensible sum. But in destruction, there is also creation. So here's 4 pieces of advice I give to companies and nations for what to do in this transition. The first is to limit your exposure to highly volatile assets, or in technical terms, to cover your ass, is how we would say it in America. Because right now, to be honest, the price of oil is doing quite well, and oil prices could spike one more time, but they will go down again, and you want to limit your exposure to that volatility. Number 2 is to get efficient. Efficiency is actually the cheapest energy and can give you a competitive advantage. Number 3 is to get flexible. Today, the price of energy is sort of similar between different parts of the world, but in the future, it won't be. The places that are best endowed with sun and wind will have the cheapest energy. And that's actually a strategic advantage for Brazil that has one of the world's lowest wind prices and some of the lowest solar prices in the world. Brazil could be a place where the cheapest electricity can be found, which would drive manufacturing here, create more economic opportunity to use that electricity to make goods and export. Get more flexible with time as well. Because of the way the sun and wind work, prices of energy will not be homogeneous through the day. They'll be driven by how much availability there is. So can you take advantage of that and run your energy-intensive processes when energy is cheapest? Can you use energy storage? Every energy storage startup I talk to works on this model. Can they use a battery to buy cheap power from the grid when it's cheapest and then save it for you to use at the more expensive times? And number 4, and most importantly, is to invest in the future. And let me illustrate what the scale of that investment could and maybe should be. This is Germany. Germany is one of the least sunny countries in the entire world. It's up there with Canada, more or less. And Germany is where the solar revolution began, for whatever reason. Germany has 40,000 megawatts of solar deployed, 40 gigawatts. That is roughly 40 times what Brazil has. Okay? But that's even more shocking when you compare the countries to scale, because this is Germany and this is Brazil. One little rectangle in the center of Brazil has more sunlight than the entire country of Germany. And if we compare on wind, Germany has 5 times as much wind energy deployed as Brazil, despite the fact that Brazil has better winds that are steadier and faster and cheaper. The world will spend $330 billion this year alone deploying clean energy, and that investment can supercharge Brazil's economy. I invest in startups looking to be the next generation, the next Teslas, the next solar cities, to help facilitate that $330 billion or more, the trillions of dollars we'll spend. If you're curious, you can find out more about what I do there. I will close with a philosophical point. I went to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. That's ILLIAC, the world's second digital computer, built there. About the size of this room, it weighed tens of tons, it drew tens of millions of watts of power. On the left is an obsolete piece of technology, an iPhone 6. Okay? The iPhone 6 weighs tens of grams, draws milliwatts of power. If you wanted to build something as powerful as my smartphone, or any smartphone, using ILLIAC technology, it would have a footprint larger than Sao Paulo, it would be kilometers tall, it would draw more electricity than all of Latin America, and it still couldn't play Angry Birds or Snapchat or anything. So how is it possible, philosophically, that this thing, which weighs tens of grams, is millions of times more powerful than that thing that weighed tens of tons? Isn't this a violation of the conservation of energy or the conservation of matter or something? My answer is this. This device is not made of matter. This is not made of glass or silicon or plastic. This is made of information. This is made of accumulated scientific discoveries, engineering discoveries, software development, and information has a fundamentally different economics than matter. Because I could break my phone, but you can't break or chip an idea. I could give one of you my phone. I could have my phone stolen, and I wouldn't have it anymore. But if I've given you an idea, we both have it. And if we exchange ideas, we're all richer, and our ideas intersect and give birth to new ideas. And the right idea can multiply the value of any resource, can substitute for land, or labor, or capital, or energy, or materials. And that knowledge, that store of ideas, is the one resource we have that is always growing over time, not shrinking. And that, fundamentally, is why I'm an optimist. Thank you all very much.